everybody. I wanted to talk a little bit about La Audiencia Real. We had kind of touched on them when I spoke about the museums, especially el Centro Cultural Taíno en la Casa del Cordón in Santo Domingo. And this was one of the locations of La Audiencia Real. So what was La Audiencia Real? So it was basically the location of the first royal court or the courts in general in all of the Western Hemisphere. And this is European courts because the Tainos had their own system where they judged what people did wrong, but the Europeans had their own setup that they then transferred to their colonies. So the royal court or la Audiencia Real, the main purpose of this was to keep the royalty or the noblemen in check. So the courts were empowered to hear complaints against virreyes y capitanes generales de la isla. And they were supposed to curb their power. And why? Well, because if you remember, before 1511, which is when this was established, the governors of the island just ran amok and they did whatever they wanted. And this ended up with the unaliving of many of the caciques and general population of the island. And because this was all about money, they needed people on the island to buy and sell. They couldn't just be unaliving people. It was bad for the economy. So this group of men who had their roles had several responsibilities. They were expected to hand out justice. They represented the king and his interests. So they had to watch closely the behavior of the governors or the administrators of the island. They also gave out certain, I'm going to say, laws or rules as they saw fit. They also received the different laws that the king had put into effect. They received it first, and then it was spread all over the island. And the last thing that they were supposed to do was to keep the indigenous population safe from abuse. So they were supposed to be basically their advocates for their rights, their civil rights. We know how that turned out. But it was this court that Enriquillo, or Enrique, because Enriquillo was actually a term that they used in order to insult him. It was an insulting term. But now we use it kind of in a loving way, and most people know Enrique como Enriquillo. But he went to these men to complain about the abuses he was suffering at the hands of his encomendero. And we know that this court would convene 2 times a week. They had both civil and criminal jurisdiction. You could make appeals. At the end of the day, you had to go to the Council of the Indies, el Consejo de Indias, in Madrid to appeal any of their decisions. So these men lived among the population. They intermarried their families, but they also were charged with judging their neighbors. But even so, they were expected to be loyal to the king's interest and not the colony's interest. Oviedo actually describes the whole rundown of these people. From the first oidor or judge that came onto the island to the one that was presiding during his time. And he even speaks about the Audiencia Real that was present in Enriquillo's time. This Audiencia Real did not exist when Nicolás de Ovando decided that it was okay to unalive 80 caciques and then 3 months later unalive Anacaona. But it was the mistreatment that Ovando gave to the indigenous population that pushed King Ferdinand at the time to establish this court because of the atrocities that were happening without someone supervising all those people that were doing whatever they wanted on the island.